10 years ago, Dr. Amy Chen broke every protocol to save a dying prisoner's life. The other guards told her not to waste her time. "He's a murderer," they said. "Let him go." But Amy believed every life had value, even the life of a man convicted of killing someone. She performed CPR for 15 minutes, refusing to give up even when everyone else had. Michael Torres survived that night because of her. 10 years later, Amy's car plunged off a bridge and burst into flames. Trapped inside, unable to escape, she watched through the smoke as firefighters rushed to the scene. The first one to reach her, the one who broke through the window and pulled her from the burning wreckage, was Michael Torres. "You gave me a second chance 10 years ago," he said as he carried her to safety. "Now it's my turn to give you one." This is the incredible true story of how one act of compassion created a ripple effect that would save two lives a decade apart, proving that the good we do in the world has a way of coming back to us when we need it most. Dr. Amy Chen was 29 years old when she started working at Riverside State Penitentiary. Fresh out of her medical residency, she could have chosen any number of comfortable positions at private practices or prestigious hospitals. Her medical school professors had been puzzled by her decision to work in corrections. "You're too talented for that," one had said. "Prison medicine is thankless work. The patients don't appreciate you. The system doesn't support you, and you'll burn out in 2 years." But Amy had her reasons. She believed that healthcare was a human right, not a privilege reserved for those who could afford it, or those who society deemed deserving. She believed that a person's worst mistake shouldn't determine whether they received quality medical care. And she believed that working in a prison, helping people that society had written off, was exactly where she needed to be. The Riverside Medical Unit was understaffed and under-resourced, a common problem in correctional healthcare. Amy was one of 2 doctors serving a population of nearly 2,000 inmates. Her colleague, Dr. Richard Walsh, was in his late 50s and had been working in prison medicine for over 20 years. He was competent but jaded, worn down by decades of dealing with a system that prioritized security over healthcare. First rule of prison medicine, Richard told Amy on her first day: "Don't get emotionally involved. These men are here because they did terrible things. Your job is to keep them alive and healthy enough to serve their sentences. That's it. Don't try to save them beyond that." Amy nodded, understanding the practical wisdom behind his words even if she didn't fully agree with the philosophy. She had been warned repeatedly about the dangers of caring too much, of seeing inmates as human beings rather than case numbers. But she couldn't help her nature. To Amy, every person who walked into her examination room was someone's son, someone's brother, maybe someone's father. They were human beings who had made terrible choices. Yes, but they were still human beings. Her first few weeks were overwhelming. The medical needs were enormous and varied. Chronic conditions that had gone untreated for years, injuries from fights, mental health crises that the understaffed psychiatric unit couldn't handle. Amy worked 12-hour days and went home exhausted, questioning whether she had the stamina for this work. But she kept showing up, kept treating each patient with the same care and respect she would give anyone else. Michael Torres came to the medical unit on a Wednesday afternoon in October. He was 35 years old, serving a 20-year sentence for second-degree murder. According to his file, he had killed a man during a bar fight 7 years earlier. He had no history of violence before that incident, no gang affiliations, no pattern of criminal behavior. Just one terrible night that had cost one man his life, and another man his freedom. He had been complaining of chest pain and shortness of breath for several days. The guards had initially dismissed his complaints as attention-seeking, a common assumption in corrections where inmates sometimes faked illness to get out of their cells or access medications. But when Michael collapsed during dinner service, they finally brought him to the medical unit. Amy examined him quickly, noting his gray pallor, the sweat beading on his forehead, the way he clutched his chest. "How long have you been having these symptoms?" "About a week, but it got worse today. Feels like someone's sitting on my chest." Amy listened to his heart, noting the irregular rhythm, the signs that screamed cardiac event. "I need to run an EKG immediately. This could be a heart attack." The EKG confirmed her suspicions. Michael was having a massive myocardial infarction. He needed immediate intervention, medications to break up the clot, possibly even emergency surgery. But they were in a prison medical unit with limited resources, not a fully equipped cardiac unit. The nearest hospital was 30 minutes away. "Call for an ambulance," Amy told the guard standing by. "He needs to get to a hospital now." The guard looked at Michael with barely concealed contempt. For this guy. He killed someone. Why should we rush to save him? Because that's our job. Amy said sharply. Call the ambulance. Now. The guard made the call, but Amy could see the bureaucratic wheels turning slowly. Authorization for prisoner transport to a hospital required approval from multiple levels of security. Even in an emergency, the process took time. Time Michael didn't have. His condition deteriorated rapidly over the next 10 minutes. His breathing became more labored. His skin turned ashen. And then as Amy was preparing emergency medications, his eyes rolled back and he stopped breathing entirely. He's coding, Amy shouted, immediately beginning chest compressions. The heart monitor showed a flat line. Michael Torres was dying. Richard rushed in from the adjacent examination room. He looked at the monitor, at Michael's lifeless body, at Amy performing compressions. Amy, stop. He's gone. No. He's not. We can bring him back. Look at the monitor. He's flat-lined. And even if we could revive him, the damage to his heart is extensive. He'll die anyway. We don't know that. We have to try. Richard's voice softened but remained firm. Amy, I understand you want to help, but we have limited resources here. We can't waste them on a lost cause, especially not for someone serving 20 years for murder. Every life has value, Amy said, continuing compressions. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Her arms were already burning from the effort. Proper CPR required significant force, breaking through the barrier of ribs and sternum to manually pump the heart. It was exhausting work. Amy, please. Think practically. Even if you bring him back, he'll need extensive care we can't provide here. He'll be a drain on an already stretched system. And for what? So he can go back to his cell and finish his sentence? 3 minutes. 4 minutes. The guards who had gathered were exchanging glances, clearly thinking Richard was right. One of them spoke up. Doc, maybe you should listen to Dr. Walsh. This guy doesn't deserve this much effort. Amy ignored them all, her focus entirely on Michael. She had been trained that brain damage became likely after 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen. She was approaching that threshold, but she had also been trained that miracles could happen, that people could be brought back even when it seemed impossible. 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Her arms screamed in protest, sweat dripped into her eyes. Richard put a hand on her shoulder. Amy, it's time. You did everything you could. No. Amy gasped out, maintaining the rhythm. Not yet. 7 minutes, 8 minutes. She could hear murmuring from the guards, could feel their judgment, their belief that she was wasting time on someone who didn't matter. But Amy had taken an oath. First, do no harm. And letting someone die without exhausting every possible intervention felt like harm to her. 9 minutes, 10 minutes. Her technique was starting to suffer from exhaustion. She knew she should let someone else take over, but she also knew no one else would. If she stopped, Michael Torres would be declared dead, and that would be the end of it. 11 minutes, 12 minutes. Amy, Richard said gently, this is beyond reasonable. You have to stop. 13 minutes, 14 minutes. Amy's vision was beginning to blur from the exertion. She had never performed CPR for this long. In a hospital setting, they would have a team rotating, would have advanced equipment, would have options she didn't have here. But she couldn't stop. Something inside her refused to give up. 15 minutes. And then, impossibly, miraculously, the monitor beeped. 1 heartbeat, then another. Weak, irregular, but present. Michael Torres gasped, his chest heaving as air filled his lungs. Amy nearly collapsed from relief and exhaustion. Richard immediately took over, barking orders for medications, for the defibrillator to be ready if the rhythm destabilized again. The ambulance arrived minutes later, and Michael was rushed to the hospital for emergency cardiac intervention. Amy sat in the medical unit afterward, her arms aching, her hands shaking from adrenaline crash. Richard sat down beside her. That was the most stubborn, reckless and impressive thing I've ever seen. You saved his life. I just did my job. No. You did more than your job. Most doctors would have stopped after 5 minutes. Hell, most doctors wouldn't have started at all for a prisoner. But Amy, you need to understand something. This kind of dedication, this refusal to give up, it's admirable, but it's also dangerous. Not physically dangerous, emotionally dangerous. You're going to care too much, and it's going to destroy you. Maybe. But I'd rather care too much than not enough. Michael Torres survived the heart attack. The hospital performed an emergency angioplasty, clearing the blockage and placing stents. He spent 2 weeks in the cardiac unit before being transferred back to the prison. Amy saw him once after his return, doing a follow-up examination to ensure he was healing properly. "Dr. Chen," he said quietly, as she checked his surgical incisions. "Thank you. The guards told me what you did. How long you kept going even when everyone said to stop. Why did you do that?" Amy looked at him. This man who had taken a life, who society had condemned, who most people thought wasn't worth saving. "Because your life has value. No matter what you've done, no matter what anyone says, your life matters." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "No one's ever said that to me before. Not since I came to prison. Most people look at me like I'm garbage. You made a terrible mistake. You took someone's life, and that's unforgivable in many ways. But that doesn't mean your life is worthless. That doesn't mean you don't deserve medical care when you're dying. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. Just take care of yourself. Follow the cardiac rehab protocols. Take your medications. And maybe, when you get out of here someday, do something good with the life you've been given back." That was the last time Amy saw Michael Torres. He was transferred to a different unit, and eventually to a different prison entirely. Over the following months, Amy thought about him occasionally, wondering how he was doing, hoping he had taken her words to heart. But the daily demands of prison medicine quickly consumed her attention. There were always more patients, more crises, more lives that needed saving. 3 years into her work at Riverside, Amy made a discovery that would change the trajectory of both her life and Michael's. She was reviewing old case files, looking for patterns in cardiac events among the prison population for a research paper she was writing, when she came across something that made her pause. Michael Torres's original conviction file was attached to his medical records, and as she read through the trial transcripts, inconsistencies jumped out at her. The prosecution had argued that Michael had instigated the fight that led to the man's death, that he had been the aggressor. But witness statements were contradictory. Some said the victim had attacked Michael first. Others said the victim had been drunk and belligerent, threatening multiple people before Michael intervened. And there were mentions of evidence that had been excluded from trial, evidence that might have supported a self-defense claim. Amy wasn't a lawyer, but she had learned over her years in prison that wrongful convictions were more common than most people wanted to believe. She reached out to an Innocence Project organization, sending them Michael's file. They agreed to investigate. The investigation took 2 years, but eventually, they uncovered enough evidence to file for a new trial. The victim had a history of violent behavior that hadn't been disclosed to the defense. Security camera footage from the bar, which the original defense attorney had never requested, showed the victim throwing the first punch. And most damning, the lead detective on the case had since been convicted of falsifying evidence in multiple cases. Michael Torres's conviction was overturned. After serving 10 years for second-degree murder, he was released from prison. Amy received a letter from him shortly after his release. "Dr. Chen, I don't know if you remember me. You saved my life 3 years ago when I had a heart attack. But you did more than that. You treated me like I mattered, like my life had value. That conversation we had changed something in me. I stopped seeing myself as a monster, and started seeing myself as someone who had made a terrible mistake, but might still have something to offer the world. When I found out you were the one who flagged my case for the Innocence Project, I couldn't believe it. You gave me back my life twice, once in that medical unit, and once by helping prove my innocence. I don't know how to repay that debt, but I promise you I won't waste this second chance." Amy kept the letter in her desk drawer, a reminder of why she did this work. Michael's case reinforced her belief that every life had value, that every person deserved quality medical care and fair treatment, regardless of what they had been convicted of. 7 years passed. Amy eventually left Riverside to take a position at Seattle General Hospital's emergency department. She had accomplished what she set out to do in corrections medicine, had proved to herself that she could make a difference even in the harshest environment. But she was ready for a new challenge, ready to work in a setting where she had more resources and support. She never forgot her time at Riverside though. Never forgot the patients she had treated, the lives she had saved. And she especially never forgot Michael Torres, the man whose case had validated her belief in second chances. Michael Torres, meanwhile, had rebuilt his life from scratch. Released from prison at 45 years old, He had to navigate a world that had changed significantly during his decade of incarceration. He struggled initially, facing the stigma of having been convicted of murder even though his conviction had been overturned. Many employers were hesitant to hire someone with his history. But Michael was determined to honor the second chance Dr. Chen had given him. He remembered her words, "When you get out of here someday, do something good with the life you've been given back." He thought about what that meant. What kind of work would allow him to give back in a meaningful way? He chose firefighting. It wasn't an easy path. He had to complete extensive training, pass rigorous physical tests, overcome the skepticism of instructors who questioned whether someone his age with his history could handle the demands of the job. But Michael had spent 10 years in prison staying fit, preparing himself for a life beyond those walls. And he had motivation that most trainees lacked. He had been given his life back twice. Once by Dr. Chen's refusal to let him die, and once by her effort to expose the wrongful conviction. He wanted to spend whatever years he had left returning that favor to others. He graduated from the fire academy at 48 years old, one of the oldest recruits in his class. He was assigned to Station 17 in Seattle, a busy firehouse that responded to everything from structure fires, to medical emergencies, to accident scenes. Captain Lisa Martinez, who ran the station, knew Michael's history. She had initially been skeptical about having him on her crew, but Michael quickly proved himself. He was disciplined, focused and fearless. He approached every call with an intensity that his younger colleagues couldn't quite match. "It's like he's got something to prove," one of the other firefighters said to Captain Martinez after watching Michael spend 3 hours at an apartment fire, refusing to take breaks. "He does have something to prove," Martinez replied. "He's proving that a second chance means something. That's more motivation than most people ever have." Michael never told his colleagues about Dr. Amy Chen, about the woman who had saved his life, and then helped free him from wrongful imprisonment. It felt too personal, too precious to share. But he thought about her often, especially during difficult calls when he was fighting to save someone's life. He would remember her refusing to give up on him, performing CPR for 15 minutes while everyone told her to stop. And he would push himself harder, refuse to quit, embody the same determination she had shown. 3 years into his career as a firefighter, on a rainy November evening, Michael was responding to a multi-vehicle accident on the Aurora Bridge. The call came in as serious, multiple casualties, vehicles over the side. The crew rushed to the scene, and what they found was chaos. A chain reaction collision during rush hour had sent 3 cars through the bridge railing. 2 had landed in the water below. 1 was precariously balanced on the rocks near the shore, smoke rising from the engine compartment. Captain Martinez began coordinating the response, directing teams to the different vehicles. Michael was assigned to the car on the rocks. It was a silver sedan, front end crumpled, driver's side door jammed shut. As he approached, he could see someone moving inside, trapped. The smoke was getting thicker, and Michael knew they had minutes before the vehicle could catch fire. He grabbed his equipment and moved toward the car, his training taking over. Assess the situation, ensure scene safety, access the victim. But as he reached the driver's side window and looked inside, his entire world stopped. Dr. Amy Chen was trapped behind the wheel, blood running down her face from a gash on her forehead. She was conscious but disoriented, fumbling with a seatbelt that wouldn't release. Her eyes met his, and for a moment neither of them moved. 10 years. It had been 10 years since he'd last seen her, since that follow-up examination in the prison medical unit. But Michael recognized her instantly. Dr. Chen. His voice was barely audible over the sound of approaching sirens and shouted commands from other responders. Amy blinked, trying to focus through the pain and confusion. "Do I know you? It's Michael Torres. You saved my life 10 years ago, at Riverside." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by fear as smoke began filling the car's interior. "Michael, I can't get out. The door won't open and the seatbelt is stuck." "I know, but I'm going to get you out. I promise. Just like you didn't give up on me, I'm not giving up on you." Michael assessed the situation quickly. The driver's side door was completely jammed, crushed by the impact. The passenger side was accessible but would require her to crawl across the seat. And with smoke filling the cabin rapidly, They didn't have time for that. He would have to break through the driver's side window and extract her. He called for backup, for the jaws of life to help pry open the door. But even as he did, he could see flames beginning to lick up from the engine compartment. They didn't have time to wait for equipment. He grabbed his halogen bar and began working on the door frame, trying to create enough space to pull it open. Michael. Amy's voice was getting weaker, the smoke affecting her. If you can't get me out, you need to go. Don't risk yourself. Not happening, Michael said, putting all his strength into leveraging the door. You didn't give up on me when everyone said to I'm returning the favor. The door wouldn't budge. The frame was too damaged, the metal too warped. Michael made a split-second decision. He used his tool to completely shatter the driver's side window, clearing away the glass. The smoke poured out, giving him better access, but also indicating how little time they had left. I'm going to cut your seatbelt and pull you through the window, he told Amy. It's going to hurt, but it's the only way. He reached through the window opening, cut through the seatbelt with his rescue knife, and began pulling Amy toward him. She cried out in pain as her body moved across the shattered glass and twisted metal. But Michael didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Behind them, the flames were spreading rapidly. Another firefighter from his crew appeared beside him. Torres, we need to get clear. The gas tank could go any second. Help me with her, Michael commanded, and together they pulled Amy through the window opening. Michael cradled her against his chest and ran from the vehicle. The other firefighter right behind them. They had moved maybe 20 yards when the gas tank exploded, sending the car up in flames. Michael set Amy down gently on safe ground, immediately checking her for injuries. The EMTs rushed over with a backboard and medical supplies. As they began treating her, Amy grabbed Michael's hand. You came back, she whispered. I never forgot what you did for me. You saved my life twice, once in that medical unit, and once when you helped prove I was wrongfully convicted. I've spent the last 3 years waiting for a chance to repay that debt. Tears streamed down Amy's face. I just did my job. No, Michael said firmly, echoing the words she had spoken to Richard Walsh 10 years earlier. You did more than your job. You gave me back my life. And today, I got to give you yours. Amy was transported to Seattle General, the same hospital where she worked in the emergency department. Her injuries were serious but not life-threatening. A concussion, lacerations, some broken ribs, but she would heal. She would live, because Michael Torres had refused to give up on her, had risked his own life to pull her from that burning car. She spent 3 days in the hospital, and Michael visited her every day during his off hours. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of the 10 years since they'd last seen each other. Michael told her about his release, about choosing to become a firefighter, about building a life focused on helping others. Amy told him about leaving corrections medicine, about the fulfillment she found in emergency medicine, about never forgetting the patients who had taught her the most important lessons. You know what the strangest part is, Amy said on the 3rd day. I almost didn't take the bridge that night. I was running late, and I considered taking a different route, but something made me choose the Aurora Bridge, like fate, or destiny, or whatever you want to call it, putting me exactly where I needed to be for you to be the one to save me. I've thought about that too, Michael replied. What if I had called in sick that day? What if our station hadn't been the one dispatched? What if I hadn't been assigned to your vehicle? So many things had to align perfectly for me to be there. My mother would call it karma. You know, the idea that the good you put into the world comes back to you. I saved your life, so the universe arranged for you to save mine. Maybe. Or maybe we just got lucky. But either way, I'm grateful. I'm grateful I was there. I'm grateful I got to return the favor. After Amy was discharged, she returned to work at Seattle General. But the experience had changed something in her. She started volunteering with the Innocence Project that had helped free Michael, using her medical expertise to review cases where health issues might have affected defendants' ability to get fair trials. She gave talks at medical schools about the importance of treating all patients with dignity, regardless of their circumstances or criminal history. Michael continued his work as a firefighter, eventually becoming one of the most respected members of his station. Captain Martinez promoted him to engineer, putting him in charge of operating the truck and managing technical rescues. But despite his professional success, Michael never forgot where he had come from. or who had given him the chance to build this life. 5 years after the bridge accident, Amy organized a fundraiser for the Innocence Project. She invited Michael to speak about his experience with wrongful conviction and redemption. Standing before an audience of lawyers, activists and donors, Michael told his story. He talked about the bar fight, about the conviction, about 10 years in prison. He talked about the heart attack that should have killed him but didn't because one doctor refused to give up. He talked about being freed, about rebuilding his life, about becoming a firefighter. And then he talked about pulling Dr. Amy Chen from a burning car, about the cosmic symmetry of being able to save the woman who had saved him. People ask me if I believe in fate or karma, or divine intervention, he said. I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that Dr. Chen showed me that every life has value, that everyone deserves compassion and care, regardless of what they've been accused of or convicted of. She risked her career caring so much about a prisoner that most people thought wasn't worth the effort. And because she did that, because she gave me a chance, I was there 15 years later to give her a chance. The fundraiser raised over $500,000, money that would help the Innocence Project free dozens of wrongfully convicted individuals. But for Amy and Michael, the real value wasn't in the money raised. It was in the proof that compassion creates ripples, that the good we do in the world has a way of multiplying and returning to us in unexpected ways. 10 years after the bridge accident, 20 years after Amy had first saved Michael's life, they remained close friends. Michael was now 60 years old, still working as a firefighter though considering retirement. Amy was 54, a respected voice in both emergency medicine and criminal justice reform. They had coffee together once a month, a ritual they'd maintained for years. During one of these meetings, Michael brought something he'd been working on. It was a memoir, a book about his journey from wrongful conviction through redemption to finding purpose as a firefighter. I want you to write the foreword, he told Amy. None of this would have happened without you. You're the beginning of the story. Amy read the manuscript over the following weeks, moved by Michael's honesty about his struggles and his gratitude for the second chances he'd been given. She wrote a foreword that focused not on herself but on the broader lessons his story illustrated. That justice system reform mattered, that people could change and grow, that compassion and determination could overcome even the darkest circumstances. The book was published to critical acclaim. It became required reading in several criminal justice programs and fire academies. Michael donated all proceeds to organizations supporting wrongfully convicted individuals and families of firefighters who had died in the line of duty. He did speaking engagements across the country, always crediting Dr. Amy Chen as the person who had made his redemption possible. But Amy always pushed back against being called a hero. I did what any doctor should do, she would say. I treated a patient who needed help. That's not heroism. That's basic human decency. But most doctors wouldn't have kept going for 15 minutes. Michael would counter. Most doctors would have given up. You didn't. And that made all the difference. Their story became something of a legend in Seattle medical and fire service communities. Medical students would hear about the doctor who performed CPR for 15 minutes on a prisoner. Fire academy recruits would learn about the firefighter who saved the life of the woman who had saved his. Both stories were used to teach about dedication, about refusing to give up, about treating every life as valuable. But for Amy and Michael themselves, the story was simpler. It was about two people who had crossed paths at crucial moments, each giving the other a chance when the world said they didn't deserve one. It was about the power of compassion to create change that echoed across years and circumstances. It was about the fundamental human capacity to see value in others even when society had written them off. Michael retired from firefighting at 62, after serving for 15 years. At his retirement ceremony, Amy gave a speech that brought everyone in the room to tears. 22 years ago, I walked into a prison medical unit as an idealistic young doctor who believed every life had value. A lot of people told me I was naive, that I would burn out, that I was wasting my compassion on people who didn't deserve it. And then Michael Torres came into my life, teaching me that I was right to believe what I believed, that refusing to give up on someone, even when everyone else has, can change the trajectory of not just one life but many lives. She paused, looking at Michael sitting in the front row in his dress uniform. Michael has saved countless lives as a firefighter. He's mentored young recruits. He's been a voice for criminal justice reform. He's written a book that's changing how people think about wrongful conviction and redemption. And all of that happened because one night, I refused to stop doing CPR, because I believed his life mattered. Michael's story is proof that when we treat people with dignity and compassion, when we refuse to give up on them, we unleash potential that the world might never otherwise see. After the ceremony, as people mingled and shared stories about Michael's career, Amy and Michael found a quiet moment together. "Thank you," Michael said simply, "for everything. For that night in the medical unit. For helping prove my innocence. For believing I could be more than the worst thing I'd ever been accused of. Thank you for proving me right," Amy replied. "For showing the world what's possible when someone gets a real second chance. For saving my life. For becoming the person I always believed you could be." They stood together, two people bound by circumstances that had seemed like pure chance but felt like something more. Two lives saved, 22 years apart. Two people who had each been in the right place at the right time, with the right skills and the right determination to refuse to give up. Dear viewers, the story of Dr. Amy Chen and Michael Torres reminds us that compassion is never wasted, that the good we do in the world creates ripples we may never fully see, and that treating every person with dignity and care can change not just their life but the lives of everyone they touch afterward. Amy's refusal to give up on a dying prisoner 22 years ago set in motion a chain of events that would eventually save her own life and inspire countless others. This story teaches us that karma, fate, or whatever we choose to call it, has a way of bringing us full circle. That the kindness we show others often finds its way back to us in unexpected ways. That refusing to write people off, refusing to accept that some lives matter less than others, is not just morally right but practically powerful. Because when we give people second chances, when we refuse to let them die literally or figuratively, we unleash potential that can change the world. Michael Torres spent 10 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He almost died from a heart attack because guards thought he wasn't worth the effort of emergency care. But one doctor refused to accept that. One doctor performed CPR for 15 minutes while everyone told her to stop. And because of that refusal to give up, Michael lived to be exonerated, lived to become a firefighter, lived to save dozens of lives, including the life of the woman who had first saved his. Amy Chen could have stopped after 5 minutes of CPR. She could have listened to the guards and her colleague who said Michael wasn't worth the effort. She could have preserved her energy for patients who society deemed more deserving. But she didn't. She kept going. And 22 years later, that decision saved her own life when she was trapped in a burning car, and the firefighter who reached her first was the man she had refused to let die. Their story is about more than just two people saving each other's lives. It's about the power of compassion to create change that echoes across decades. It's about how treating others with dignity and care, even when they seem undeserving, can transform not just their lives but our own. It's about the fundamental truth that every life has value, that no one is beyond redemption, and that the good we do in the world has a way of coming back to us when we need it most. The years continued to pass, and both Amy and Michael found that their intertwined story had become larger than just the two of them. Amy was invited to speak at medical conferences around the country, sharing her experience about the importance of treating every patient with equal care regardless of their circumstances. She talked about that night in the prison medical unit, about the 15 minutes of CPR that had seemed futile to everyone except her, about how that single decision had rippled outward in ways she never could have predicted. At one conference in Chicago, a young medical student approached her afterward. "Dr. Chen, I'm starting my residency next year in emergency medicine, but I've been considering corrections medicine because of your story. How do you maintain that level of compassion when you're working with people who have hurt others?" Amy thought carefully before responding. You don't have to approve of someone's actions to recognize their humanity. Michael Torres was convicted of killing someone. That act caused immeasurable pain to another family. But in that moment when he was dying, none of that mattered. He was a human being in medical crisis, and I was a doctor with the ability to help. That's all that should matter in that moment. But doesn't it take a toll, caring that much for people who might not deserve it? That's the thing, Amy replied. It's not about deserving. Healthcare isn't something we should ration based on moral judgments. And yes, it takes a toll. But not caring takes a bigger toll. I've seen doctors who stop seeing their patients as human beings, who go through the motions without connecting. They burn out faster than those of us who care deeply. Because when you stop caring, the work becomes meaningless. When you care, even when it's hard, you remember why you became a doctor in the first place. The student nodded slowly. Michael Torres, the man you saved. Did he ever thank you? Amy smiled. He saved my life 10 years later. I'd say that's thanks enough. Michael meanwhile found himself becoming an unofficial spokesperson for criminal justice reform. His story, a man wrongfully convicted who nearly died in prison but was saved by a compassionate doctor and went on to save countless lives as a firefighter, became a powerful narrative for advocates pushing for changes in the system. He testified before state legislature committees about the need for better medical care in prisons, about the importance of investigating potential wrongful convictions, about giving people real second chances. During one hearing, a legislator challenged him. Mr. Torres, you were fortunate to have Dr. Chen, but most prisoners don't have someone willing to go to such extremes for them. How do we replicate what she did on a systemic level? Michael leaned forward, his voice steady but passionate. You don't need to replicate Dr. Chen specifically. You need to create a system where her approach is the standard, not the exception. Every prisoner should have access to quality medical care. Every person accused of a crime should have adequate legal representation. Every conviction should be thoroughly reviewed when new evidence emerges. Dr. Chen didn't do anything extraordinary in terms of medical skill. She just refused to give up and treated me like my life mattered. That should be the baseline, not something we celebrate as exceptional. The committee was quiet for a moment. Then the chair spoke. You've given us a lot to think about, Mr. Torres. Your testimony today has been powerful. I'm only here because someone refused to let me die. A lot of people in prison never get that chance. We need to fix that. The legislation that session didn't pass, but it planted seeds. Over the following years, Michael and Amy both became part of a growing movement pushing for healthcare reform in corrections, for better investigation of potential wrongful convictions, for treating incarcerated individuals with the dignity they deserved as human beings. 25 years after Amy had first saved Michael's life, they were invited to participate in a documentary about redemption and second chances. The filmmakers wanted to capture their story as an example of how compassion could create transformative change. Amy was initially hesitant, uncomfortable with the attention, but Michael convinced her. People need to hear this, he told her. They need to know that refusing to give up on someone, treating them with dignity even when society says they don't deserve it, those actions matter. They ripple outward in ways we can't predict. The documentary took 6 months to film. The crew interviewed both of them extensively, visited the prison where they had first met, talked to Michael's old colleagues from the fire department, spoke with former inmates whose cases Amy had helped review through the Innocence Project. They recreated key moments from their story, though of course the dramatic recreations couldn't capture the raw emotion of the real events. One of the most powerful segments came when the filmmakers brought Amy back to Riverside State Penitentiary, to the medical unit where she had worked for 3 years. Dr. Richard Walsh, now retired, agreed to be interviewed. He spoke about that night when Amy had performed CPR for 15 minutes. I thought she was being reckless, he admitted to the camera. I thought she was setting herself up for burnout, for disappointment. I'd seen too many idealistic young doctors come into corrections thinking they could save everyone, only to be crushed when they realized the limitations of what we could do. But Amy proved me wrong. She showed that sometimes refusing to accept limitations is exactly what's needed. I learned something from her that night. I became a better doctor because of her example. The documentary also included an emotional scene where Amy and Michael visited the site of the bridge accident. Standing on the Aurora Bridge, looking down at the rocks where Amy's car had crashed, they reflected on how easily things could have gone differently. If you had been assigned to a different vehicle that night, Amy said quietly, if another firefighter had reached my car first, I would have died. But I wasn't assigned to a different vehicle, Michael replied. I was exactly where I needed to be. Just like you were exactly where you needed to be 25 years ago when I had that heart attack. I don't know if that's fate, or coincidence, or divine intervention. But I know that we were both given the chance to save each other. And we both took it." The documentary, titled 15 Minutes, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was later picked up by a major streaming platform. It became one of the most watched documentaries of the year, sparking conversations about prison reform, wrongful convictions, and the importance of compassion in healthcare. Amy received thousands of messages from people who had watched the film, medical students telling her she had inspired them to pursue careers in underserved communities, families of incarcerated individuals thanking her for treating their loved ones with dignity, people sharing their own stories of second chances, of refusing to give up, of compassion creating unexpected change. One message in particular moved her deeply. It was from a corrections officer who had been working at Riverside the night Amy saved Michael's life. "I was one of the guards who told you not to bother," he wrote. "I'm ashamed of that now. Watching your documentary made me realize how wrong I was. I've worked in corrections for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of prisoners come and go, but I never really saw them as human beings until I watched your story and realized what could have been lost if you had listened to me that night. I'm retiring next month, and I wanted you to know that your example changed how I've treated every inmate since then. Thank you for showing me that every life matters." Amy shared the message with Michael. "This is what I mean about ripples," she said. "That guard changed how he treated prisoners because of what happened that night. How many lives did he impact over the past 25 years? How many people were treated with more dignity because you survived? And how many people did I save as a firefighter because you refused to let me die?" Michael added, "How many families didn't lose their fathers or mothers or children because I was there to pull them from burning buildings?" The math becomes impossible at some point. One act of compassion creates a chain reaction we can't fully calculate. As Amy approached 60, she began thinking about her legacy. She had accomplished more than she'd ever imagined when she was a young doctor walking into Riverside State Penitentiary. She had helped establish new standards for medical care and corrections. She had worked with the Innocence Project to exonerate dozens of wrongfully convicted individuals. She had inspired a generation of medical students to pursue careers focused on underserved populations. And she had maintained a friendship with Michael Torres that had become a testament to the power of second chances. She decided to write a book, a memoir about her years in corrections medicine, and what that work had taught her about humanity, compassion, and justice. Michael contributed a chapter about his perspective on their shared story. The book, Every Life Has Value: Lessons from Prison Medicine, became a bestseller, used in medical schools and criminal justice programs across the country. In the book's epilogue, Amy wrote about what she had learned from Michael and all the other patients she had treated over the years. "I went into corrections medicine believing I would save lives through medical skill. What I learned is that the most important thing I could offer wasn't technical expertise. It was the refusal to give up. It was treating every person with dignity regardless of their circumstances. It was believing that every life has value, even when society has decided otherwise." Michael Torres taught me that those beliefs aren't naive or idealistic. They're powerful, they're transformative, and they create change that echoes across years and lives in ways we can never fully predict. Michael, now in his 70s, continued to mentor young firefighters and speak about criminal justice reform. His own book had been updated multiple times, each edition adding new stories about the people whose lives he had saved and the ongoing work of reform that still needed to happen. He never tired of telling his story, of emphasizing that he was alive and doing meaningful work because one doctor had refused to give up on him. On the 30th anniversary of Amy's 15 minutes of CPR, they organized an event bringing together everyone whose lives had been touched by their story. The corrections officer who had changed his approach to inmates, the medical students Amy had inspired, the people Michael had saved as a firefighter, the wrongfully convicted individuals whose cases Amy had helped review. It was a room full of ripples, of lives that had been changed directly or indirectly by what had happened in a prison medical unit 3 decades earlier. Amy looked around the room, overwhelmed by the visible evidence of how far one act of compassion had spread. Michael stood beside her, equally moved. "You know what the most amazing thing is," he said quietly. "None of this would exist if you had given up at minute 5, or minute 10, or even minute 14. One more minute of effort created all of this. Or if you hadn't become a firefighter," Amy replied. "Or if you hadn't been assigned to my accident." The chain of events required so many things to align perfectly. Then maybe that's the real lesson, Michael said, that we should always give that extra minute of effort. Always show up when we're needed. Always refuse to give up, because we never know what ripples we're creating. Dear viewers, the story of Dr. Amy Chen and Michael Torres reminds us that compassion is never wasted, that the good we do in the world creates ripples we may never fully see, and that treating every person with dignity and care can change not just their life but the lives of everyone they touch afterward. Amy's refusal to give up on a dying prisoner 30 years ago set in motion a chain of events that would eventually save her own life and inspire countless others. This story teaches us that karma, fate, or whatever we choose to call it, has a way of bringing us full circle, that the kindness we show others often finds its way back to us in unexpected ways. That refusing to write people off, refusing to accept that some lives matter less than others, is not just morally right, but practically powerful. Because when we give people second chances, when we refuse to let them die literally or figuratively, we unleash potential that can change the world. Michael Torres spent 10 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He almost died from a heart attack because guards thought he wasn't worth the effort of emergency care. But one doctor refused to accept that. One doctor performed CPR for 15 minutes, while everyone told her to stop. And because of that refusal to give up, Michael lived to be exonerated, lived to become a firefighter, lived to save dozens of lives, including the life of the woman who had first saved his. Amy Chen could have stopped after 5 minutes of CPR. She could have listened to the guards and her colleague, who said Michael wasn't worth the effort. She could have preserved her energy for patients who society deemed more deserving. But she didn't. She kept going. And 30 years later, that decision had saved not just Michael's life and her own, but the lives of countless others who had been touched by their story, inspired by their example, changed by the proof that compassion creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see in the moment.